I was staying at my grandfather's house in Vermont one weekend while he went on a trip to Arizona with some of his old fishing buddies. Since he asked me to keep an eye on the place, I decided to sleep in the guest bedroom right next to his own room. That guest bedroom always had two twin beds inside of it. My cousin Daniel and I used to sleep in them whenever we had sleepovers at my grandpa's place. That night, I chose the bed next to the window. But before lying down, I went through the house and checked every single door, making sure they were locked. It was still pretty early, so I didn't actually fall asleep right away. There wasn't much to do in my grandfather's house anyway, so I just spent about an hour on my phone, scrolling, watching random videos, texting friends. That's when I started hearing something faint outside. A voice. It sounded like a woman softly saying, "Hello?" I left the bedroom and slowly made my way toward the front door, moving carefully so I could listen more closely. Sure enough, the voice was repeating "hello" every 10 seconds or so, and it seemed to be coming from the front porch. My grandfather's door doesn't have a peephole, but his dining room windows give a clear view of the front steps. I quietly moved over to one of those windows, trying to peek through the blinds without drawing attention. Apparently, I didn't do a great job of hiding myself, because when I looked out, I saw a woman standing there on the porch, and she was looking directly at me, almost like she knew I would be peeking through those blinds. Once again, she said, "Hello," but this time with this unsettling, almost mocking smile on her face. She looked to be in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, and she didn't look like some sweet, harmless old lady either. There was just something about her expression that creeped me out on a very deep level. I backed away from the window, trying to convince myself maybe she was just one of my grandfather's friends. But then again, it was nearly midnight. Why would anyone show up at this hour? And if she needed something, why wouldn't she knock on the door or ring the bell? Why was she just standing there, repeating "hello" over and over again? I was honestly unsettled. I went back to the guest bedroom, shut the door this time, and tried to calm myself down. With the door closed, I couldn't hear her anymore. Maybe she had left. Maybe it was just some random weirdo passing by. I started texting my sisters and a couple of my friends, telling them about the bizarre situation. They all told me to call my grandfather, but there was no way he'd be awake. He barely ever checks his cell phone anyway. Just when I thought the silence had lasted long enough for me to relax, it was broken by a loud bang at the window. Not a knock, not a tap, but a violent, shaking bang. My chest tightened and my body instantly went into fight or flight mode. Then right after the banging stopped, that same voice whispered again, "Hello!" Fueled by adrenaline, I yanked the blinds all the way up, only to find myself face to face with that horrifying woman. Separated from me by nothing more than a thin sheet of glass, she was still smiling. I screamed at her, "I'm calling the cops!" I slammed the blinds back down and bolted out of the room, running straight into the living room, then upstairs to the other guest bedroom. I shut the door and locked it, basically boxing myself in. For whatever reason, I didn't actually call the police. I can't even explain why. I just felt safer waiting it out, hoping she would eventually leave. I hid under the covers, wide awake for hours. Eventually, I worked up the courage to go back downstairs and check the windows. By then, she was gone. The next morning, I called my grandfather and told him everything. He started yelling into the phone, panicked and upset. He said that just a few days earlier, while grocery shopping, he noticed a woman, about 10 years younger than him, who wouldn't stop staring at him and smiling for no reason. I told him to calm down and not to worry too much, but the way he shouted about that strange woman gave me chills. I couldn't say for certain if it was the same person, but the thought has never really left my mind. My name is Ethan Miller, and I'm currently a sophomore at Boston University. Boston is a great city, but if you know it well, you also know it has plenty of sketchy areas once the sun goes down. Not long ago, I went through a rough breakup with my first serious girlfriend. And to distract myself, I decided to get back into online dating. I downloaded Hinge, and after a couple of weeks, I matched with a girl named Rachel. She had blonde hair, a big smile, and from the way she wrote, we seemed to click right away. She told me she also studied at Boston University, and honestly, our similarities were kind of uncanny. We both loved going to the movies, we both read a lot in our free time, and we even had the same sarcastic sense of humor. For someone who had just been dumped, it felt like a stroke of luck. After chatting for about a week, I suggested we go see a movie together. She was thrilled by the idea and said she'd pick me up, which I thought was a little unusual, but I didn't question it too much. She told me to meet her at a specific corner near Commonwealth Avenue, just a short walk from campus. So, at around 9 p.m., I walked over to that corner and stood waiting. She asked me to share my live location, and without thinking twice, I did. A few minutes later, a dark sedan turned onto the street and slowly rolled toward me. The car stopped right in front of me, and the driver rolled down his window. It wasn't Rachel.
You waiting for someone? You waiting for Rachel?
That's when my stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone exactly where I was meeting her. Yeah, I said cautiously. How do you know that?
I'm Rachel's father. She didn't want some random guy meeting her in the middle of the night, so she asked me to pick you up first. Hop in, I'll take you to her.
I stared at him for a good few seconds. He looked way too old to be Rachel's dad. Late 50s, maybe even early 60s. And something about the way he said it felt rehearsed. I'm not naive when it comes to shady situations. I asked him firmly, why didn't she tell me you'd be picking me up? He hesitated and repeated, she just didn't feel safe, that's all. I didn't say another word. I turned and started walking away in the opposite direction. The man shouted after me, sounding surprised. Hey! Hey, come back! But I kept moving. I've read enough kidnapping stories to know exactly where this could be headed. I glanced back just to make sure he wasn't trying to make a U-turn. Thankfully, he drove straight down the road and turned left out of sight. I breathed a sigh of relief and continued walking toward campus. But when I reached the next block, I noticed a car parked on the side of the road with its headlights off. I slowed down just enough to get a look. It was the same car. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't make out if he was inside. I pretended I didn't notice and kept walking. That's when I got a text from Rachel. Why didn't you get in the car with my dad? My heart sank. I ignored the message and picked up my pace. I kept checking behind me every few seconds, and eventually, when I reached an intersection, I turned sharply and then sprinted toward campus. This time I wasn't followed, or so I thought. By the time I got close to the dorms, I slowed down, but that's when I heard footsteps behind me. At first I told myself I was being paranoid, but then I heard the crunch of broken glass under a shoe. That confirmed it. Someone was tailing me. I quickly ducked behind a parked van and crouched, waiting to hear where the footsteps were coming from. Sure enough, they were just a few cars away. I peeked out, and there he was, the same old man. He stepped out from between two cars across the street. His face twisted as he called out something I couldn't quite make out, except for the words, "Come back. I'll take you to her." He had to be at least in his 60s. There was no way he could catch me if I ran full speed, so I bolted. I sprinted all the way to my dorm building, and by some miracle, he didn't follow me inside. When I finally got into my room, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely text. My roommate wasn't there, so I had no one to tell in person. That's when my phone buzzed again. A new message. It wasn't Rachel. It was from the man's number. It read, "You little piece of shit, you're lucky you got away. I would have strangled your ugly ass." I still have the screenshot saved on my phone. I replied instantly, "Thanks for the threat. It's going straight to the police." Then I blocked his number. Even now, I've kept that conversation as evidence. I haven't gone to the police yet, but I know I have to, because someone out there was setting me up and I barely escaped. When I was 18, I had a summer job working as a part-time janitor at my old high school in Denver, Colorado. The hours were all over the place, sometimes mornings from 9 a.m., and other times late nights that stretched close to midnight. It depended on how much money I needed that week. Most nights, I wasn't alone. There were usually 2 or 3 other custodians working alongside me, but every once in a while, I'd be the one left to close the building. That was back when the school didn't have cameras installed in every hallway yet, so technically I had a lot of freedom when no one else was around. One Friday evening, my supervisor, his name was Mr. Harris, told me he had to leave early. That meant I'd be finishing the shift by myself and locking up for the night. Before leaving, he told me, as always, "Text me if anything comes up." Then he grabbed his stuff and headed out. I actually loved being left alone because it meant I could slack off. Most of the time, I'd do maybe half an hour of actual work, then hang around on my phone or leave early and still get paid. That night, though, Mr. Harris asked me to handle one last task before I clocked out. There had been an assembly in the gym earlier, so he wanted me to return all the folding chairs to the basement storage room. No problem. I grabbed a stack of 6 chairs and carried them down. The basement at that school was creepy. The lights were dim and flickered sometimes. It didn't even feel like part of a school. It felt like the basement of some old warehouse. All the extra art supplies were stored down there too. There were wooden easels, stacked canvases, and most unsettling of all, life-sized art mannequins draped with dusty paint cloths. From a distance, they looked almost human. I dropped the first stack of chairs near the others and went back upstairs to grab more. When I returned with the second load, I immediately noticed something that made my stomach twist. One of the mannequins that had been covered earlier was now exposed. The cloth that had been draped over it was gone. I froze. I knew for certain it had been covered just minutes ago. I pulled out my phone and texted Mr. Harris. "Hey, I think someone's down in the basement." He responded, "What do you mean?" I typed back, "One of the cloths got moved. It was covering a mannequin before, now it's not." He took a minute, then replied, "There shouldn't be anyone else there." I tried to steady my breathing. That's when I noticed something even worse. In the corner of the storage room, tucked just outside the reach of the single overhead light, was another paint cloth. But this one wasn't draped over anything. It was covering a lump on the floor. A lump that was moving ever so slightly. There was no mistaking it. Someone was hiding under there. I backed away slowly, then bolted up the stairs and locked the basement door behind me. My hand shook as I texted Mr. Harris again. "There's definitely someone hiding under a cloth down there." He replied, "Call the cops." But I didn't want to call the police. I don't even know why. I guess I was hoping it wasn't that serious. I told him, "Just come back. You only left like 10 minutes ago." He texted back, "I'm not coming back. Be a man and deal with it." I felt a knot in my stomach. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the basement door and went back down the steps. The storage room looked different now. The cloth that had been moving earlier was gone, just lying flat on the floor. Whoever had been underneath it wasn't there anymore. I stood, frozen in place, my ears straining. That's when I heard it. Metallic thumps. They came from directly above me. I looked up and felt my blood run cold. The vents, those large rectangular air ducts that ran along the ceiling, were shaking. Deep, heavy dents were forming in the metal, one after another, as if someone was crawling through the vents right above me. Then the banging started. Loud, violent bangs. Like whoever was in there was trying to break through the floor of the vent and drop down into the room. I didn't wait to see if they'd succeed. I sprinted up the stairs, slammed the door shut, and locked it again. Then I grabbed my bag, ran through the halls, and left the building without looking back. The next morning, when Mr. Harris asked me about the night, I told him a half-truth. I said I thought I saw someone in the corner, but when I checked again, they were gone. I didn't mention the banging in the vents. It was my last week on the job anyway. But even now, years later, I still think about that night. And I can't shake the feeling that someone really was down there with me, hiding in the dark.